Let's talk about this infamous knife sheath and the plausible defense coming from Ann Taylor. And we're going to jump right into it. Smash that like button and subscribe. In the probable cause affidavit on November 13, 2022, Corporal Brett Payne, while inside of the 1122 King Road property, states, "As I entered this bedroom, I could see two females in the single bed in the room. Both Gonsalves and Mogan were deceased with visible stab wounds. I also later noticed what appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's right side when viewed from the door. The sheath was later processed and had K-Bar, USMC, and United States Marine Corps Eagle Globe and anchor insignia stamped on the outside of it. The Idaho State Lab later located a single source of male DNA left on the button snap of the knife sheath. And thus we have a suspect profile." Flash forward over a month later, days before Bryan Kohberger's December 30, 2022 arrest. On December 27th, Pennsylvania agents recovered the trash from the Kohberger family residence located in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. That evidence was sent to the Idaho State Lab for testing. On December 28, the Idaho State Lab reported that a DNA profile obtained from the trash and the DNA profile obtained from the sheath identified a male as not being excluded as the biological father of the suspect profile. At least 99.9998% of the male population would be expected to be excluded from the possibility of being the suspect's biological father. So, for everyone saying Bryan Kohberger is the whodunit, the knife sheath is not necessarily a smoking gun. But the knife sheath is one of the factors behind numerous news media outlets rushing to associate Kohberger's guilt. Throughout the past decades, we have learned DNA is not infallible in the courtroom, so America, let's try to get this one right in the Kohberger trial. What is touch DNA? Touch DNA is defined as the body fluids or epithelial cells left behind on an object when it is handled by a suspect. I want to share two articles with you because I find them both rather fascinating. Specifically, it's fascinating when touch DNA, already proven to be a forensic nightmare in crime labs and courtrooms everywhere, is being further explored by law enforcement using public genealogy databases. The first article is titled "How Police Actually Cracked the Idaho Killings Case," and it's by Heather Tal Murphy, written January 10th, 2023. And the second is titled "Forensic Nightmare, The Perils of Touch DNA," and it's written by Michelle Malkin on January 4th, 2017. I'll be reading from a few excerpts, and I'll leave you links in the description. Michelle Malkin covered the investigation of Daniel Holtzclaw and even becomes an advocate that speaks about the DNA deception in his trial. And because we are discussing touch DNA, I'm going to use the Holtzclaw investigation to give you an illustration of literally how sensitive the transfer of cross-contamination is. In Daniel's initial interview, he's asked to take off and submit his clothes. One of Daniel's accusers, when being interviewed, has just sat in this very chair and placed her purse and an open soda can on this very table prior to him entering this room. We watch Daniel's hand hold his body weight up in the same place an alleged victim has just set her personal belongings. Daniel will proceed to hold his body weight up with his hand as he unties his shoes and takes his shoes off. He will then undo his belt. He will then take keys out of his pants. Then he will resume with unbuttoning his pants and unzipping his pants to take them off. In the following days to come, voila, the alleged victim's DNA is now on the crotch of his pants. And without getting into the political dog and pony show of this case, whether you believe Daniel Holtzclaw is innocent or guilty, This is a factual illustration of how easy it is for touch DNA to be transferred, contaminated, and then misconstrued in our criminal justice system. America never saw Holtzclaw rape any of his accusers. But America did just see a justifiable explanation of how touch DNA has been transferred to Holtzclaw's crotch area of his pants. So, what is Bryan Kohberger up against? First, there's a lot of scientific controversy surrounding this knife sheath in the Kohberger investigation. And that's why I want to give the public a glimpse of how plausible Ann Taylor's defense strategy is going to be in an attempt to dismantle the prosecution where this knife sheath is discerned. Exactly how do we end up with the knife sheath? Tal Murphy writes, once law enforcement obtains DNA of a potential suspect, they create a profile of it and it's then run through an FBI database. If there are no matches, then they can move to a public database. There are two that law enforcement can get access to solve homicides and sexual assaults: GemMatch and Family Tree DNA. These are sites where people voluntarily upload their DNA and can allow police to search for matches. However, the precise way forensic genealogy helped investigators zero in on Kohberger hasn't been previously reported. This is one of the most high-profile cases in which this relatively new, ethically contentious method has been used so soon after a crime has been committed, and it will likely influence how law enforcement approaches it going forward. Though multiple news outlets, including CNN and ABC News, reported that the forensic genealogy helped with the case, none has explained how it was used or why it did not appear in the affidavit. Even after pulling the phone records, the team had no way to be certain Kohberger's DNA would match the knife sheath DNA. A genetic genealogy lead is just a hypothesis, after all. A final step typically involves conducting surveillance on the suspect and then collecting something they discarded, such as a cigarette butt or soda can, extracting DNA from it and comparing it with the crime scene DNA. On December 27th, agents collected trash from outside the Pennsylvania home where Kohberger was visiting his parents, according to the affidavit. The Idaho State Lab reported that there was an extremely high probability it contained DNA belonging to the suspect's father. On December 30th, agents arrested Kohberger. In this publicized debate, the first camp says leaving out the information in the affidavit is offensive. The public deserves to know when it is used. Why hide it? Asked Greg Hampakayan, a biology professor at Boise State University, who is also the director of the Idaho Innocent Project. Having worked on 2 cases in Idaho in which forensic genealogy helped clear 2 people who were wrongfully convicted of murder, he knows firsthand that the foundational science is solid and the technique is valuable, but he's observed that the longer a novel forensic method stays hidden, the more room there is for errors in its application. Let's go get it tested in court and let's tell the public about it, he said. The second camp says that these people need to chill out because an affidavit of probable cause is supposed to explain why police believe someone is their suspect, not how they arrived at that conclusion. You don't typically include anonymous tips or internet searches in the document. This isn't that different, they insist, given that you would never use a generic genealogy lead to arrest someone, only to take the next step and collect DNA from them to compare with the crime scene samples. This article goes into this huge debate that when law enforcement uses these outsourced labs to make genealogy connections, that it should be public info. But I think people are missing a bigger piece of the puzzle here. If this technology is so great and it can incriminate and or exculpate a suspect, then what our society should be concerned with is if Bryan Kohberger is the killer, then why is his DNA only on the knife sheath? If Kohberger's DNA does not turn up anywhere else inside of the King Road property, and if the DNA of our 4 students does not turn up on Kohberger's belongings outside of the King Road property, then we have to deduce scientific reasoning for cross-contamination. If all of these factors remain true, then it's important for us as a society to note the mere presence of DNA does not prove a crime happened. It does not tell you how or when the material got to its discovered location. Contrary to Hollywood crime show oversimplifications, DNA is not a synonym for guilty. So when it comes to Bryan Kohberger, guilty or innocent, America has to learn to get it right. Because with touch DNA being so sensitive, you the viewer, yes you, guilty in the court of public opinion can change your very life tomorrow. Malkin writes, this mundane yet menacing phenomenon exposes the double-edged sword of forensic science. With just an innocent handshake and indirect transfer of epithelial cells, you could find yourself suspected of heinous crimes, charged with a rape, or convicted of murder. With that being said, is it plausible for Bryan Kohberger in his defense strategy to prove cross-contamination of the knife sheath? We have the Idaho State Lab, and inside of this lab, the Kohberger family trash was brought in from Pennsylvania. This trash is consistent with items that collected the Kohberger's everyday DNA. And somewhere in the lab, we also have the knife sheath. We know the knife sheath already has a single source of DNA from an unknown male on it. But now the knife sheath plausibly has the transfer of touch DNA from 2 or more males, being that of both Bryan and his father. 2 examples of how this plausibly occurs. 1, the knife sheath was out in the open when the Kohberger family trash is brought into the lab. Or 2, the lab wasn't cleaned thoroughly enough after handling the Kohberger's family trash, and thus, when the knife sheath is brought out, the cross-contamination occurs. Then we have discussions of an undisclosed secondary lab, where law enforcement inquires for a genealogy match to the suspect, and the problem now resides in how many persons have handled this evidence. I don't find it reasonable that the secondary lab that only tries to match our ancestors would have the same strict guidelines for controlling the environment to prevent cross-contamination that a normal crime lab would have. With that said, even in crime labs with their strict guidelines, we still get an egregious amount of contaminated evidence. Even if the trash and knife sheath were tested in 2 different labs, the packaging, handling, and transfer of the materials from a lab technician to a police officer who is given the chain of custody over the evidence, it is highly plausible that the said police officer could transfer the touch DNA from one lab into the other lab. Be prepared to watch a similar defense go down in this very fashion at trial. Touch DNA is not reliable. Believe you me, if Ann Taylor is a good attorney, this is going to be argued. It's going to be her job to get the jury to believe that there is more proof of the Kohberger family trash from the state of Pennsylvania entering into an Idaho lab and cross-contaminating the knife sheath than there is proof of Bryan Kohberger entering into the King Road property and murdering 4 students. If DNA fails to wind up anywhere else in the case, then it's plausible Bryan Kohberger will have a great chance of proving cross-contamination. This will all, of course, hinge on expert witnesses who have testified in the past about the unreliability of touch DNA. Mind you, the Moscow Police Department has never seen a quadruple murder case. Was there any mishandling of the evidence from lab to lab? And could a further review into the very labs that have supposedly linked Kohberger to the knife sheath be the very labs that helped to acquit Kohberger? Leave your comments below, smash the like button, and subscribe for future updates. Thank you. Oh, has anyone else supposedly seen Enon Harsh at one of those house parties on the police body cam footage during a noise ordinance complaint? I'm trying to recall where I saw the footage of him possibly twirling his staffs. If anyone else has seen this, could you please help to find it? Thanks. See you next time, guys.